want to share something with you, if that's okay. A small piece of the story of my life. I've been asking myself why. Why do I want to share this story? When I ask myself this question, my brain begins to scramble in search of an answer. The first answer I hear inside my head is the word freedom. I'm not completely sure I understand what that really means, but I hope that through sharing this story with you, I will come to understand what this freedom really means. When I think about my life up to now, when I think about how I got to be where I am now, I am always transported back internally to my childhood. I had a good childhood. I had a great childhood. I was well loved. I was well cared for. I felt that I was given an amazing opportunity to have the kind of childhood that encourages an open mind and an inquiry into spirituality and the nature of spiritual existence and experience. I was raised in a haunted house, and not only this, but my family, along with myself, regularly attended a spiritualist church. You know, the kind where people communicate with deceased relatives and receive messages, often cryptically encoded in symbolic language, by people who consider themselves to be psychic. I didn't realize until much later in my life that this is not exactly the sort of thing most people would consider normal. However, I didn't and still don't care about that. The interesting part about this is what all of this did to my mind. One of my earliest memories is of waking up in darkness in the middle of the night to having my hair pulled by some unknown force, screaming for my mother, who came running from her bedroom to console me. At the time, I was convinced my teddy bear did it, but I wasn't sure. All I knew was that it hurt. I would have been around 3 or 4 years old. A slightly later memory is of myself waking up to hearing my mother screaming in her bedroom. She had awoken to see a figure of an evil-looking hag of a woman floating inches above her, looking directly into her eyes, disappearing only when she screamed loud enough to wake up the entire house. Another experience I feel is worth mentioning occurred probably around when I was 9 or 10 years old. It was late at night, sometime around midnight. I was laying downstairs in the front room on the couch. I refused to sleep upstairs in the bedroom where I'd had my hair pulled, and I would often leave the television on displaying static to give off some light, as I was naturally more afraid in the dark. Lying on the couch, trying to sleep, I suddenly heard a horrifying laughter occurring what seemed like a few inches away from behind my head. I could only describe it as the cackling laughter of two witches, as there was definitely more than one voice, though they were laughing in unison. Finding a sense of courage, I got up to check behind the couch, and there was nothing there. I could list a dozen more experiences like this, along with stories I was told of other family members having similar experiences within the same house, but I won't. I want to move along the timeline of my childhood, a little further to when I had moved to live with my dad, after he and my mother had gotten divorced. At this time I was 12. Through the week I would stay with my dad. On the weekends I would stay with my mum and my 3 siblings at the house I previously mentioned. This night, I'm in my bedroom at my dad's house. It's late and dark. My dad is asleep in his bedroom. I'm laying in bed, unable to sleep, but very tired. Out of nowhere, I heard the upstairs toilet flush, as though someone had pulled the handle. I was overcome immediately by an intense sense of dread and terror. Alone in the darkness, my mind began to churn with imaginings of what it could be. I think at this point in my life, the paranormal experiences had almost completely died down. Probably something to do with the fact that I only visited the so-called haunted house on weekends. But this lessening of the paranormal activity was all about to change forever. Back to being alone in my bedroom. After hearing the toilet flush and being overwhelmed by intense fear of what might have caused it, nothing happened. After a while, the terror faded, and my emotions, along with the room and house around me, settled back into a general sense of calm. It was probably 20 or 30 minutes later that I began to drift off into sleep, when again suddenly I sensed a powerful presence in my room. Something was watching me from the dark corner of the doorway. I couldn't see it, but I could feel it. It felt dark and malevolent, a deeply sinister force. I was terrified and tried to move, but I couldn't. I tried to scream and shout for my dad, but all I could muster was a low whisper, more of a strained, quiet, whispering groan. I was completely paralyzed and unable to speak. I lay like this for a couple of minutes, and nothing changed. I was locked in this paralysis, with this sense of darkness, standing in the corner, and nothing else occurred. Eventually the sensation left my body. I could move and speak again, and the embodied dark spirit or force, whatever it was, left my room. I got up and went to get in bed with my dad, not saying anything to him about what had happened. The next day, with a very vivid and clear memory of what had occurred, I I mentioned it to some of my closest friends at school. They were intrigued, but had no idea what it was, none of them claiming to have ever experienced that or anything similar before. That evening at dinner, I mentioned it to my older sister, who had come around for tea, and also to my dad, while we were all eating around the dinner table. I got the exact same response as I had from my friends, but this time I sensed just a very slight undercurrent of concern, a kind of worry I didn't fully understand at the time. My family had always been open-minded about ghosts and spirits. I remember doing Ouija boards with my siblings and hearing of their own scary and strange encounters, but it seemed like none of them had ever encountered anything so personal and so terrifying. This was the only time I ever brought it up in front of anyone, until much later in my life. I didn't know it at the time, but what I had experienced that night when I was 12 was my first involuntary episode of sleep paralysis. This experience, and many others just like it, occurred extremely frequently in the subsequent years of my life. At times, every single night, though most often just 2 or 3 times a week. They would differ in intensity and sometimes manifest odd sensations, sounds, sights, smells, and other physical phenomena. Most seemed merely to me as some sort of hallucination, like hearing music that seemed to be influenced by my own thoughts, swirling shapes and colours appearing in front of my vision. And not all of them were terrifying, but some of them were. I remember having my bed sheets pulled downwards towards the bottom of the bed, and being physically pulled towards the edge of the bed, even one time being pulled out of the bed to land facing an oppressive darkness beneath the bed, and then being pulled into it. I know that some people will merely brush these experiences off as nightmares or dreams, but I promise, and you can ask anyone who has experienced some form of sleep paralysis about it, these are not dreams. Throughout the experience, you are very much awake and aware. At this point in my life, as I moved into my early teens, I had a lot of questions and absolutely no answers to any of them. As I suppose is to be expected, I really struggled to make sense of my life as a teenager. I never heard anyone speak about similar things and what the world presented to me as fact, or as meaningful, or as real, didn't in any way remotely approach the reality that I was experiencing in my own private world. At 14, I began experimenting with drugs and quickly lost track of schoolwork, getting to a point of absolute rebellion against religion, my elders, the law, essentially any form of authority whatsoever. After all, nobody knew anything about my perceptions of life, so why should I listen to what they have to say about my life? I can skip ahead a few years now to when I was 17. I had emigrated to Australia with my mother, her husband and my younger sister when I was 15. But still, I struggled to find my place in the world or any real insight into my life. By the force of what one might call destiny, or the universe, or karma, or maybe God, I met someone when I was just about to turn 18. He was a jeweller. My mum had gone to visit his shop with a watch, or bracelet, or something similar, and I had gone along with her for the ride. mentioned to my mum that I was going to have a look at the poster I had seen for karate classes in the local area advertised in one of the other shop windows. After I returned from this inquiry, the jeweller, who had overheard what I said to my mum, pulled me aside and asked why I wanted to learn karate. I told him, well, I've always wanted to do martial arts, and that I was actually thinking of going to China to study with the Shaolin monks, a legendary school of Kung Fu dating back thousands of years, which is still in operation to this day. I had seen a show some months earlier of a travelling group of monks performing incredible feats, and it had had a massive impact on my mind. I'd never seen anything like it. The jeweller's response to this was, why go to China when you can do it in your own backyard? I thought, my backyard? How can I learn Kung Fu in my backyard? My backyard is tiny, and I have no idea what I'm doing. Before I could say anything, the jeweller reached under the counter and pulled out 2 laminated pieces of A4 paper and handed them to me. He said, take these away, give them a read, and come back to me in a few weeks if you want to know more. The moment I got home, I sat down and looked over what I had been given. The first document was a description of mystical Kung Fu. The second outlined the lifestyle of spiritual enlightenment and also described a school where one could study and practice various disciplines pertaining to mystical Kung Fu and spiritual enlightenment. Within seconds of having finished reading, I went straight back to the jeweller's shop and expressed my interest to learn more. Over the next couple of months, I trained with an apprentice monk, 5 days a week, 2 hours a day, learning the basics of martial arts and personal training. After 2 months of hard work, my commitment and intention to train seriously led me to be introduced to the master of the school. Within one conversation, I knew right then and there that this was what I had been seeking my entire life. This monk and Kung Fu master had complete insight into my experiences and pointed out that the way my mind was operating showed an inclination towards the mystical arts and sciences. In a short amount of time, I was offered a position as an apprentice, and so I dedicated myself completely to the path of the mystical warrior monk. I spent a total of 5 years living at the monastery. I was ordained after the first 6 months. In that time, I learned about and practiced Kung Fu, meditation, martial arts, personal training, mystical psychology, and other methods of spiritual self-mastery. It was within this time period that I finally began to understand what had been happening to me throughout my childhood. My intense fear of the paranormal had traumatized me and brought about the experiences of involuntary sleep paralysis. Once I understood this, and through developing the practices of meditation and concentration, I learned how to voluntarily induce states of sleep paralysis, whereby I discovered what was, at that time, the most powerful revelation of my life. Sleep paralysis is the initial phase of an out-of-body experience. While keeping my mind fully awake as I set my body down to sleep, I learned to fully detach my consciousness from my physical form and enter into the consciousness of mind itself. I will not be going into detail here regarding exactly what happened within this space over the course of the following years, but I will say this. The intense fear that I had felt in my mind was the source of the waking nightmares I had experienced as a child. With repeated exposure to self-willed, altered states of consciousness, and by diving as deep as I possibly could into the dark abyss of my mind, I overcame my fear and realized that the entire time it was my own mind that was the source of all my troubles. After a total of 5 years intense study and practice, I left the monastery and wandered the earth as a homeless monk, doing my utmost to abide in a state of harmony with whatever circumstances I found myself in. I continued to explore my life and mind while learning from the people I encountered. "8 years ago, I met the mother of my 2 young children and did my best to make the relationship work. Unfortunately, there came a time where she no longer wished to live the kind of lifestyle that was and still is so dear to my heart. So, the inevitable separation occurred. I still live in the same town where my children are. I see them regularly each week. They are both truly bright lights in my life. Though I state this all here very simply and matter-of-factly, the breakup was a time of great turbulence for me. I was torn to pieces over the stress of trying to balance my life in a way that would allow me to continue to be a supportive father. would also allow me to continue to live and practice the disciplines that I so badly needed to maintain my stability. I sought help from a group of Buddhist monks living at their monastery. While visiting my children monthly, I tried to figure out an appropriate pathway that would serve everyone in the ways in which we all needed. I spent a total of 6 months at this monastery and received approval from the head monk to become ordained as a Buddhist monk. Although I was very interested in the teachings of the Buddha as a form of practice, the religious elements of this particular tradition did not sit well with my nature. I felt too restricted by them. And had reached a place whereby following the rules of a religious dogma would have in fact been a step backwards from the freedom I had encountered in learning from and following my own heart. This also combined with the fact that I could sense greater and greater despair in my children each time I went to visit them, receiving more and more requests from them to return. I was not being given the level of communication I needed with them, and I could sense a great turbulence and disorder weighing heavily upon me when I even thought of being away from them for much longer. It was at this time that once again destiny revealed its hand. Before I get into this part of the story, I want to say two things. One, that we are now getting very close to the present day where this story will come to a close. And two, what follows here will be heavy and deals with the subject of death. So, if that disturbs you, please feel free to turn off this video now, or skip ahead to the end and bypass this section. The last time that I had paid a visit to my children, I became more certain that I was indeed going to return to them. I started to look around at potential properties to rent and found that there was in fact a housing crisis within the area. There was only one single rental available in the entire town, and so I sent in an application. I received a response quite quickly and went for the interview. It turned out that I had met this person before. She had wanted to establish a school of some kind, referencing natural living and spirituality. We had spoken about a potential collaboration, but she had lost sight of the project for one reason or another. She knew who I was and what I was about, so she accepted me as a tenant. I was delighted. I returned to continue living in my car for a further 3 weeks, while the current occupant prepared to leave. One night, about a week before I was supposed to move in, she called me, claiming that there was something she needed to talk to me about. As it turns out, she had recently been diagnosed with cancer, a grade 4 glioblastoma, brain cancer, the most aggressive kind, which has less than a 5% chance of survival. I sensed the reality of the situation immediately. She was going to die. As a monk who is serious about spirituality, it has been impossible to avoid the topic of death. In fact, it is a fundamental element of deep meditation practice, one that requires a great deal of reflection and courage to fully comprehend. I won't go into great detail here, as this is most certainly a topic that needs the absolute highest degree of care and caution, but I can say this. In order to proceed into the deepest realm of meditation practice, one must learn to consciously enter into the personal experience of complete detachment from the physical body. In other words, one must personally face death. Full and complete spiritual enlightenment is not possible without this heavy depth of experience. Because of my training and personal experience, I knew that meditation was the answer for this woman. I informed her honestly that meditation might help her heal. If there was any chance of her surviving, it wouldn't hurt. And that in the face of the reality of impending death, meditation would help her to let go of her life and die as peacefully as possible. At this point, she had been told by medical experts she had 12 months left to live. Turning to face death is the most difficult thing a person can do. Within this harsh reality, we are forced to confront the deepest anxieties of our mind. Our very sense of self comes into focus the moment we truly encounter even the scent of death's embrace. I spent 2 months initially with the woman who was slowly dying of cancer. I promised her I would be by her side the entire time, and that I would do everything I could to transmit the peace of meditation towards her. As I expected, she struggled deeply with the idea of letting go. People often think they will deal with death later. They have far too much going on, far too many things they want to do. So they ignore the reality of death, or at least they attempt to, until the very final stages of their life. This is understandable, of course. The fear of death and dying runs very deep within our consciousness. It is very hard to even attempt to face death, let alone attempt to overcome it. I sat with her 5 days a week for 4 hours in total each day, 2 hours in the morning, 2 hours in the evening. We would talk about her life, her difficulties. At first, the thought of her death was rarely mentioned. She wanted to forget. Out of compassion, I would let her try to forget for a while, discussing with her whatever philosophical and spiritual concepts occupied her thoughts. And yet, out of the very same compassion, I would gently remind her of the gravity of her situation, and that it was essential to gain as much peace as possible now to help herself relax and let go as easy as possible later. We would talk initially, and then meditate together. At first I would guide her, and then together we would drift into silence. My teacher warned me at this time that this practice was dangerous. If I went too deep, it could kill me too. I knew this was the case. I could feel it. Death has a powerful flavour. It is unmistakable within the clear awareness of strong meditation. Every second I spent meditating by her side, I was brought closer and closer to the reality of my own impending death. I could see and feel the force of death slowly overcoming her body. in mostly gentle but sometimes forceful waves. The pain grew more intense, as did my own. Sitting still, looking death right in the eye. Even though this was the case, I could not turn away from her. In the end, I saw her as no different from my own child. How could I possibly abandon my child, or any child, at the time when they are most in need of comfort, when they are more afraid than they have ever been before in their life? I knew this would have strong consequences on my life, but I also knew that I would face them no matter what the cost, for her. After 2 months had passed, she had begun to make some progress. She was happier. She was less angry about her situation. She wanted to have fun for the rest of her days, and not get so caught up in meaningless trivialities as she had before. She decided to go on a road trip with a few of her closest friends. I knew she did not want to and was not capable of letting go to the horrendous and terrifying degree that could potentially induce healing. So I told her I would be there for her when she returned and was ready. I moved out of the house soon after, as I was offered a more appropriate arrangement, living at the property of a student in a private caravan, the one I reside in now. The woman spent a further 8 months or so enjoying herself, doing as much as she could with the time she had left. For the final 2 months of her life, after she had decided to end all forms of medical treatment, including chemotherapy, and after she had been approved to make use of a voluntary assisted dying service, which is relatively new to the country I live in, we recommenced the meditation. This is where things became extremely uncomfortable. She was far into the final stages of progression of her cancer at this stage. She had lost the majority of usage of her left side of her body, mostly unable to walk or use her left arm and hand, the left side of her face drooping and numb. I would sit with her again, morning and evening, and again, as her pain intensified, so did my own. I had to lie down and rest for anywhere between 4 to 8 hours each day to deal with and redirect the stagnant energy that was amassing within my system. The type of stagnation that puts pressure upon the internal organs, making it hard to breathe, causing chest pains and headaches. When not lying down like this, I would enter into intense periods of walking meditation and stretching to try to reactivate and re-energize my body. With great pain and great difficulty, I managed to make it through. She did eventually pass away. I led a meditation group in which around 25 of her closest friends and members of the community attended. She was conscious and present throughout, and so took the opportunity to say goodbye. The medication was administered, and within minutes, she was gone. This happened a little over a year ago. I still carry the weight and the pain of those events. I've managed to cleanse a lot of it, but there is some I feel I may never fully eradicate. In all ways, encountering death truly does take its toll. However, not a single thing in all of this would I change. Though I daily battle a deep depression, a deep addictive desire to lay still and let this body go, at the same time I have a deeper love and excitement for this same life, more than I have ever had before. The purpose of the creation of this YouTube channel was to help with the reignition of the potential for this ongoing life. Of course, I am learning, making occasional errors, correcting them, learning more, and refining the process. I know continuing with this is the greatest challenge I have ever faced, and I can say I am confident in my ability to slowly, gently, cautiously push on. There is so much to do, so much meaningful and important work to be done. This life has given me more than I could ever have hoped for, and I want so much to give back in the exact same way and more. I still dream of the day when I can repay back the great kindnesses done for me in this life by giving love and kindness and support to others in return. To people like you, whoever you are watching this, So, after all this has been said, what does any of this have to do with freedom? I'm still not sure I fully understand, but if I had to take a guess, I would say that I hope this video in some way serves the cultivation of freedom in your own life. Whether it is freedom from the fear of being judged, freedom from the misery of hiding from what you really are, freedom from the isolation of thinking you're alone, freedom from the despair of thinking that nobody cares, and perhaps most importantly of all, freedom from the horror of thinking that you are stuck, that there isn't a way forward for you, that there's nothing you or anyone can do to help. I really do hope this serves you in unbinding the knots that keep you tied down. Because the truth is, there is always a way towards freedom. Ready? Big wave? Good job. Like what happened?